Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled Metrics Best Practices for High Growth Cloud Companies. My name is Rihanna Collier, and I'm the Vice President of the Software Division here at SIIA. I am delighted to have two of our members here with us today, Lauren Kelly, the CEO of OpEx Engine, and David Pesley, who is the CFO of Adaptive Planning. They are going to share these all-important metrics that you should be paying attention to as you look to scale your cloud business. But before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping reminders. All of your lines will remain on mute. So if you'd like to ask questions, please use the chat box to the left of your screen. We will address as many questions as we can following the presentations. If for some reason we don't get to your question, we'll follow up via email after the webinar. We will be recording the webinar, and the recordings and the presentations will be sent to you at the conclusion of today's event. I want to take one quick moment to highlight SIA's upcoming flagship conference, All About the Cloud. All About the Cloud, we bring together leading ISVs for 2.5 days of networking, hot topic sessions featuring key industry executives, workshops, you name it, we've got it. I encourage you to mark your calendars and plan to attend. It's May 7th through 9th in San Francisco. And in fact, I'm extending a special registration offer to all of today's webinar attendees. If you register for the conference by March 15th, you can take advantage of a discounted registration rate of $695. That's actually $300 off the current SIA member rate and nearly $800, I believe, off the non-SIA member rate. So it's a pretty good deal. The website's there on your screen, sia.net/AATC. Again, it's a limited time offer, so I highly encourage you to take advantage of it. In addition, if your company is interested in further visibility at the event through a sponsorship, please let me know. We do fully expect to sell out again this year. My contact details are there on the screen, and we will provide all this information again in the follow-up to the webinar. Okay, now let's get started with why we're all here today. Each year, the SIA partners with OpEx Engine to produce the annual software and SaaS benchmarking. As we enter the benchmarking season again this year, we thought it would be valuable to hear some best practices for utilizing these types of metrics. So again, we're lucky to have two great presenters with us today to share some of their industry advice. So I'd like to turn it over to our first presenter, David Pesley, who is again the CFO at Adaptive Planning. David, I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Rihanna and SIIA for holding this event, and for Lauren as well, who will be speaking later. And also thanks to everyone in the audience for attending. I'm going to talk about best practices for metrics today, and some of the points I'll be making are specific to high-growth cloud companies, but many are applicable to, frankly, all well-run companies. I'm going to talk a little bit about Adaptive Planning. We're a planning and business analytics company, so it's interesting to hear perhaps what we do for our own planning and analytics. And then after that, I'm just going to talk about a lot of metrics best practices. What are they? How are they used at Adaptive Planning and other high-growth companies? I talk to CFOs of other companies quite a bit, and it's interesting some of the perspectives that they provide. And then I'll have a few real-life examples, and then at the end we've got some questions to cover anything that you feel hasn't been covered. So Adaptive Planning has the largest installed base of business management analytics, and it covers a wide range of budgeting, planning, reporting, analytics, and it has customers in 80 countries, over a dozen languages, and actually it is the planning tab in NetSuite. So if you have NetSuite and you go into financial planning, it says in very small letters next to it, powered by Adaptive Planning. So this kind of capability is available in several places. And then some logos on the bottom. It travels well across quite a few industries. Our products are basically in sort of 3 different areas: the planning, reporting, budgeting, and then consolidations, and then visual analysis and discovery, where that's where you get a lot of the real impact. So combining these together really creates a capability that's really complete and unmatched. Okay, so here's a key page. We're talking about the best practices in metrics and this cloud SaaS revolution that's going on right now. To optimize metrics, you really have to look at 6 different factors. I think most people would think of, okay, what do you measure when they think about metrics? And it's so much more than just here's your list of metrics, now go measure it. It's who is involved with the process. It's how is it delivered, and that gets into the power of data visualization, for example. How often is it being delivered? And is the delivery process reliable, secure, scalable, powerful, and at the same time it has to be easy and intuitive. So that's a bit of a conflict for a lot of different applications. And then if you're a CFO, which this product covers a lot of the CFO organization as well as other organizations that are concerned about cost, both in time and money, because cost isn't just one or the other. It really is a factor of both of those. So again, this is just a really key message of this entire presentation is best practices in metrics. It's not just what you measure. It's just best practices aren't going to do a lot of good unless you address each of these plus a few more that we'll see later on. So, and then at the bottom in orange, it talks about how it's no longer just a top-down centralized function. It really requires broad collaboration across the company, a wide range of metrics, and on a real-time basis. So again, it's all these 6 factors combined. So this is a bit about the evolution of how business intelligence and business analytics has grown over the years. It started out with Excel, which many companies still use quite a bit, but it's very error-prone, non-scalable, and it's just an accident waiting to happen. Then people graduate sometimes to what they call the big 3, the big iron, Oracle, SAP, IBM, and those are powerful products. And I think there's a concept, these must be better because they cost more. So, but I think what people find is that they're highly complex, they're slow to deploy, hard to use, and IT intensive. And so that used to be okay, but now people are getting more agile, flexible, and frankly impatient. They're just looking for something that's easy to use, et cetera. And so part of the practice, the best practices, is getting an application and a process that is basically all of the above and doesn't create compromises or, again, like I said, accidents waiting to happen. Okay, so going to the next page, why are metrics important? I think the main thing is that real-time metrics and analytics are a big driver and guidance for the company's growth. So if you're growing extremely quickly, I have some pictures of some compasses, different types of compasses, and management needs these tools in order to successfully chart its course with making decisions very quickly. And so again, this real-time aspect has become a lot more important. And then the second item there just talks about how metrics provide insights that aren't visible and unfiltered raw data. So how you can just cut to the chase is what's really demanded by CEOs and CFOs today. And I listed a few examples of some progressive SaaS cloud companies that use this kind of approach, and that a number of companies on the Deloitte Fast 500 technology companies also use this agile approach. So here's really a key page in terms of what best practices metrics are used for cloud and SaaS companies. First of all, there's in SaaS and cloud companies a concept of monthly recurring or annual recurring revenue. That's very important. And then you compare the sales and marketing costs to those, and comparing the various ratios of that. And then you start coming down to average deal size, total contract value, and then lifetime value, and then ratios to sales reps. And now here we come to one really important, the renewal rate, which is the opposite of the churn rate. So in a SaaS company, it's very important that your customers are satisfied. Each year they have a decision to make. Do they continue on with you? Are they satisfied with your product? And it's important both from a customer satisfaction standpoint, but also from your own internal economics as well, because this renewal rate and churn rate relates to both customer satisfaction down near the bottom of the page and also to lifetime value. And the way it relates to lifetime value is the calculation is lifetime value is 1 over the churn rate times your annual recurring revenue, and then you could add professional services and other to that as well. So basically, for example, if you had a churn rate of 10% per year, then your lifetime value would be 1 over 10%, or a 10-year life of your average customer. But if you had only a 5% churn rate, it'd be 1 over 5%. That'd be a 20-year life, average life to your customer. So it's a tremendous difference if you continue to improve customer satisfaction. So at the same time, you're improving customer satisfaction for the customers, and you're making your own business economics a lot more viable so that you can have funds to continue to improve your products for your customer, which feeds back into their satisfaction. So in adaptive planning's case, for instance, we are in sort of the 95% range as far as renewal rate. But if you include actual additional seats that people purchase and additional products, we're actually at 120% renewal rate. So there's various things that you can do in order to improve your customer satisfaction, renewal rates, and just find more ways to satisfy your customers. Then going down further, talks about improving velocity and efficiency metrics. What that means is, okay, you take every one of these metrics and you say, okay, so how are they improving over time? So that creates a whole other dimension to each one of these metrics. And then benchmarking is very important. Lauren will talk about that as well. We've had a close relationship with OpEx Engine for 4 years, and once you get these metrics, you always want to know, well, I think that's a good number, but how does that compare to our peers and various others? And then, again, talking about the time components. And then, but at the bottom, last but absolutely not least, customer satisfaction. As it says there, you must have high customer satisfaction to be a cloud SaaS company. It's just not something that's optional. If you don't have a passion for your customers throughout your entire company, your employees, your channel partners, everything, then you need to move more back into the big iron mode or something. Anyway, on the next page, this is kind of interesting. Adaptive planning has been ranked #1 customer satisfaction by a number of different measures. But what this is interesting is because it breaks down what is customer satisfaction. I mean, some people just say, well, that means customer satisfied. But, at our company, we break it down, and, fortunately we have CPM industry experts like BPM Partners and others that rate us on these. So we can actually see on each of the individual elements what more can we do to make our customers happy. And then this slide talks about who needs to be involved with the metrics. And the key message here is it's not just the finance group. I mean, again, this is the 21st century, and senior management now is not patient with waiting for things. They've learned that they can actually have real-time metrics on their desk. Line managers, they need to be involved. They need to be accountable. They need to have buy-in to the processes. And employees everywhere across the company just need to be in alignment with cross-functional collaboration and cooperation. So that's quite important. Then let's talk about some real-life examples for a minute. So first of all, there's examples of when people move from those big iron, cumbersome, expensive, slow, on-premise, IT-supported software apps, what do they do when they get into, a more agile planning and metric systems? We have just quite a few examples. Very interesting. Boston Scientific is a company that replaced their Oracle Hyperion, and actually, I have a quote from their senior finance manager that just said that what they wanted to have was clear visibility and what the assumptions and business drivers were in place. And in the Hyperion scripts, that was difficult to ferret out. And these challenges became greater as our specific instance of Hyperion was being discontinued and IT support decreased. So we had to find a new solution. They talk about how better planning processes at a fraction of the cost compared to the millions of dollars and years of investment spent maintaining the on-premise Hyperion solution. So basically, different-sized companies are all coming to a similar conclusion that they want it better, faster, more flexible, and less expensive. And they've been finding that they can move to products like adaptive planning for less than the cost of their, say, upcoming annual maintenance fee. So I was talking with this large software company CFO a few weeks ago. They had acquired a small company and that was using adaptive planning, and they also are taking out their Oracle Hyperion and moving into adaptive planning. So they're using it for a wider range of capabilities and metrics because it can be more widely adopted since the adaptive planning product and requires less training. So also why Excel is on its way out, I think we addressed that. Again, many are using it, but I think that especially when you start getting to cloud and various other SaaS metrics, Excel and all of these other products are just not scaling and not being reliable and what people are looking for in the 21st century here. So at the bottom of the page, I just listed a couple of examples of some things that some metrics at adaptive planning. We have quite a few that were mentioned on page 8, and then there's in support group you can measure all sorts of real-time metrics, and in services and just frankly all across the company. We get companies that are very, very different from each other that use the product in quite a few different ways. This next slide is business intelligence data visualization, similar to what we use across our company. And we know many diverse companies are actually doing the same. The power of data visualization is important too, because again, especially when you want to monitor something real time, the excursions, the problems and excursions are just more quickly highlighted using business intelligence data visualization than on pages of data. So adaptive planning offers a suite that's just very well integrated across all the various planning, consolidations, visualization, reporting, and some of the other companies that we have, again, a tremendous number of customers, so we see the usage of this in broad different ways, not just necessarily focused on the finance organization either. Snap-on Tools, for example, is a customer of adaptive planning, and they have trucks that are constantly on the move, and they use adaptive planning to provide real-time metrics there on a wide variety of items they need to track. And technology companies have adopted this in these types of planning and metrics approaches in a wide different ways as well. And even companies as diverse as there are mining companies in Australia that use adaptive planning in order to not just handle their accounting, planning, and forecasting needs, but also to provide real-time metrics, basically shift by shift as well, in terms of just seeing how any issues or excursions that come out in that regard. So I think the main messages here again are that best practices and metrics, it's just a lot more than what you measure. It's really a comprehensive approach to metrics and on a real-time basis, and involving broadly across your company, and delivered in a way that is easy to use, and then on a frequent basis, and then again there's a question of at what cost too. So you want to optimize just as many of those as you can in order to optimize your approach to metrics. Hopefully it's been interesting to hear how a planning and analytics company handles its own metrics, and some of the other companies we've been talking to. And if you have any other further questions, we're going to have an opportunity for that after Lauren's presentation, and also I can be reached in LinkedIn. So thank you very much for attending today. I'd like to introduce and hand this over to Lauren Kelly now, the CEO of OpEx Engines. It's the leader in operating and financial benchmarking for mid-market companies. A bit about Lauren. Lauren is CEO and founder. She brings 25 years of tech company management experience to OpEx Engine, as well as 6 years as an international economist at the U.S. Department of Commerce's Office of Computers. She was an executive officer at e-commerce pioneer Art Technology Group, building revenues and operations through IPO. She managed 20 countries for Borland Software and helped build compact computers business in Eastern Europe in the early 1990s. Ms. Kelly is currently based in Boston and has previously lived and worked in London and Paris, Germany, Jamaica, and Cleveland, Ohio, so just basically everywhere. OpEx Engine has been benchmarking the software and SaaS industry for 7 years, and adaptive planning has participated for the past 4 years. We use OpEx Engine benchmarking data in our own budgeting and strategic planning processes, and we're very pleased to welcome Lauren Kelly. Lauren, it's over to you.
Oh, that's great, Dave. Thanks very much. That was a great presentation. Well, thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you very much to the SIA for organizing this, both for their members and for their broader software community. And we've very much enjoyed working with the SIA over the past number of years. I'll just take a couple minutes and tell you a little bit about OpEx Engine. I started it 6 or 7 years ago because in my background as an operating executive, I always wished that I had better data to make business decisions. We've spent the past 6 years developing detailed benchmarks of the software industry based on the confidential input of a very large number of software and SaaS companies, and I'm happy today to share some of our findings with you. We focus on operational areas like finance and sales, marketing, G&A, R&D, productivity, and then in the SaaS sector, we also benchmark a number of critical customer metrics, churn metrics, hosting metrics, and other metrics that are specific to the SaaS model. And as you've heard, we partner with the SIA and conduct the benchmarking every year, and it's open now through the middle of April for participation. On a side note, we've also developed an on-demand product called the Financial Insights Reports, which quickly and easily puts together financial comparisons of operating metrics of companies from a database of 16,000 public companies. And again, like adaptive planning, that product is really there to help eliminate that manual, awful mess that I think we've all done, where we spend a lot of time looking up SEC documents and putting together Excel spreadsheets. It's something that can be done quickly and easily on the web, and we've applied some best practices to that, so we're excited about that as well. So let's talk about SaaS. Everyone knows that SaaS is a different way of delivering and selling software, but I think what is less well known and should be talked about is how it changes the financial modeling, the modeling overall, and the critical metrics that you need to build and grow your business. Because in the old days, the focus was on selling software. And in SaaS, the focus is on getting and keeping customers, as Dave talked about with the importance of customer satisfaction. It really sounds simple, but there are a lot of subtleties in this different focus around getting and retaining customers and then measuring the profitability of doing that. So fundamentally, building a SaaS business is about building a model for growth, and you have to have systems and a platform in place for that rapid growth and managing that model. So let's talk at a high level a little bit about, what are the differences between SaaS today and, a traditional software model. In a perpetual license model, you had less visibility to the outcomes. Generally, you would account for how the business did after the close of a quarter. You might have a big deal that comes in at the last minute that dramatically changes revenue recognition and cash flow, and that's great. And so sales is always closest to the forecast. There are fewer moving parts to track in this kind of business. And it's just sales really drives the P&L. So for a SaaS business, particularly once you get to critical mass, it's different. The SaaS model allows you to be more predictive. A SaaS CFO or CEO can forecast how the quarter will end in advance of the quarter end. And if a big $1 million or $5 million deal comes in at the end of the quarter, it's not going to dramatically change revenue recognition or cash in the company. It's great, and obviously you want it at any time, but it's not going to dramatically change your numbers. So in the SaaS model, finance really owns the forecast, and it's not just the forecast, but the forecast is now a complex waterfall analysis of recurring revenues, churn, increments of new revenue, and a bunch of other things. There are a lot of moving parts to consider, and I think that's also why working with a company, having the right platform and systems in place to be able to track those kind of things like what adaptive planning does is really important, because you don't want to be doing that manually. And given that there's so many moving parts, that has big implications for the company and how finance interacts with the rest of the company, and not just around the forecast, but with all the KPIs. Another difference is that, going back to comparing perpetual license to SaaS model, is that in the perpetual license model, the value of the customer relationship really drops off after, the big sale. Granted, you might have a support contract or maintenance contract, but that's really a small percentage, and typically you manage that you relegate it to low-level, low-cost employees. And again, in SaaS, it's all about the customer relationship, the renewals, the upselling, the expanding within the customer on an ongoing basis. And I think Dave gave the example of, how dramatically it can change the value of a customer just by changing your level of churn, which isn't something you can just do in an equation. You have to make those things happen. But that means your people have to be great at managing customer relationships. Your systems need to be really efficient in tracking your customer relationships, and your platform needs to be scalable and efficient in delivering your software, because your delivery is the basis of your relationship with the customer. And I'm going into more detail about all of this because, as you can imagine, all of these things can be tracked. They all relate to metrics that are key to driving your business. So if we go to the next slide and look at, this is a very similar, maybe not quite as detailed, but very similar slide to Dave's. And it makes sense because every year we review the metrics that we track. with CFOs that we're working with CEOs, with investors. And some of the key metrics that we track are obviously monthly recurring revenues or annual recurring revenues, depending on the model of the company. And then the growth rates, because everyone wants to build a growing business, and the whole point of SaaS is that you're adding subscribers, and hopefully you're doing that in an efficient way, and you're doing it in a more and more profitable way. And so one of the ways that you also track that is through the cost of customer acquisition, the cost of maintaining a customer. So once you get the customer, what does it cost you to keep them on your platform? And again, these things are all relative. You can't say a cost of customer acquisition of X. Let's say your cost of customer acquisition is $5,000 to acquire a customer. Well, that could be great or that could be terrible. If your average subscription in a year is, you're charging $200 a month for a subscription, and your customers typically have just a couple subscribers, but it costs you $5,000 to get that customer, and you have a 40% churn rate, well, that's a terrible model. But if you're selling an enterprise software product or application suite or business suite, and your average subscription per customer is $50,000 or $100,000 per year, and you have some upsell opportunities there as well as you add modules. If you had a customer acquisition rate of 5,000, which I've never seen it that low for that kind of enterprise contract value, that would be amazing. So it's all relative. In the same way, again, customer lifetime value is measuring the profitability of a customer. The way we look at the simple sort of equation for customer lifetime value is looking at your monthly recurring revenue times gross margin over churn. So you're taking into account both the profit of a customer plus the churn involved in it. And then we look at churn by customer and by dollar value. So if you have 100 customers in a year that are up for contract renewal and you renew 85 of them, that's an 85% customer renewal rate by customer value or customer number. But if you had $10 million of contracts that were up for renewal and you renewed $9 million, then that's a 90% by dollar value. And that's because we're benchmarking across many, many different companies. We don't separate out by upselling and expansion within a customer, but certainly as a company you should do that on an individual basis. So just give you a little sense of why we do this and how important benchmarks. I mean, fundamentally, it's very important to understand the benchmarks as a neutral third-party data point to compare your internal data against. It doesn't mean that benchmarks are a model for your business. It's not a blueprint. Every company is going to be higher or lower in different metrics. But it's important to know how you stand in terms of that and to use that as a quick guide to understand, gee, we could be doing better here, or my peer group is moving up in this efficiency area. Maybe it's because there's new best practices, new techniques. It gives me a quick guideline. And it also is very important for setting internal targets and getting executive agreement. Just a quick story. One of the companies that we work with has found huge management efficiency and productivity in using the benchmarks extensively in the budgeting process. So each department's given the budgeting package, the VP of sales, the CTO, the head of R&D are each given a budgeting package and also a benchmarking package when they're going through the budgeting process. And again, like many companies today, this is not just a once-a-year process. It's maybe at least twice a year, and then it's reviewed throughout the year. And the department heads come back and need to position what they're asking for in terms of a budget in the context of their peer benchmarks and also in the context of the other parts of the company. And they found that by doing this and then also doing the same thing with the board when the budget is presented to the board for approval, that it has cut down the haggling and the back and forth and the sometimes emotional or ego-driven process that can ensue, because nobody has the right answer and it does need to be worked through. But if it's worked through in a collaborative way with good external data, it tends to eliminate take away some of the emotion. So before we get into some of the specific benchmarks that we've developed, I just thought I'd also set the stage a little bit in terms of our experience in working with companies of defining who your peers are. We sort our benchmarks by business model, by types of, size of revenue, also by how many customers you sell to. So, I think the financial model for a company that is selling thousands of low-priced subscriptions or products to, as compared to the financial model for a company that's selling to hundreds of enterprise customers with a fairly high average contract value, is going to be quite different. In one case, you'll have a direct enterprise sales organization, highly paid salespeople with a lot of expenses. In another, you'll have, a more inbound marketing financial model. Not that that's necessarily cheaper than a direct enterprise sales organization, but the money is going to be spent in different places. And your R&D and your, hosting and enterprise requirements are different than for huge volumes of low-priced product. So you need to look at that. And inevitably, and you're in the SaaS industry, and someone in your board, someone in the management team says, well, yeah, but Salesforce.com is doing it this way. And, I think it's just important to look at Salesforce.com is a more than $2 billion company. They've been in the business. They're the leader, 10, 13 years. Is that your exact peer? Maybe you want to look at them and learn from them, but you want to make sure that you're positioning yourself and benchmarking yourself against companies that are comparable. And I think also looking at companies that are just selling the same product is also limiting, because your direct competitors are not necessarily set up exactly the same way. And just think about in any market, there will be very large competitors who've been in the business for a long time, may have much older structures, they have a lot of revenue. There's going to be some mid-sized companies and some small companies. Just taking the average of those competitors is also not going to be the best way to give you a financial benchmark. So let's look at, in terms of what we found last year for private SaaS companies. And here we looked at SaaS companies by revenues less than 10 million with an average recognized revenue, in this case, of 4 million. And SaaS companies with revenues between 10 and 20 million, so the average was about 13.4. And then another group recognized revenue for SaaS companies between 20 and 40 million. And as you can see, the revenue growth built for this group. The numbers of customers certainly built. And obviously, because you're dealing with smaller numbers to start with, growth rate and the number of customers was much higher for the smaller companies. But actually, this is the beginning of a trend that we're going to talk about a little bit in the next slides, which we saw pretty strongly last year, is that companies sort of hit their stride in that $10 to $20 million range and then actually put on gas in the $20 to $40 million range and increase some of these customer acquisition numbers. And then, of course, they also increased the number of employees. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see, and I'm sorry, I should have made the, hopefully you can see that, but what's interesting here is that we found really that SaaS companies are hitting the break-even point earlier than ever before. 5 years ago, most of the SaaS companies that went public at $50 to $100 million were not profitable. Last year we saw the, or a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we saw the average cash flow break-even point around 25 million. And then in 2012, we were starting to see it more in the range of 13, 15, 16 million. And what we saw definitely in terms of operating expenses was that companies obviously are spending heavily in the negative to get to 10 million. Then from 10 to 20 million, are figuring out their model, figuring out their target customer, getting the processes in place to hit their stride, figuring out, is this a good business model? Can we be cash flow positive? And then there were, a lot of, and these are typically in this group were venture-backed firms, that there was a lot of, major funding rounds at the $18, $20 million level, where the companies then went back into the red, spending heavily, obviously not quite as much as they were proportionally when they had smaller revenues, but spending more because at that point it's not so much that profitability is the goal, but customer acquisition, market establishment, growth, and revenue growth was definitely the goal. So if you look at it here in terms of spending rates for marketing, sales, R&D, and also revenue, the blue line are the under $10 million companies. So they're spending the highest percentages it's obviously against revenue. And then in the red line, it goes down, and then it went back up slightly, where in some cases, like sales and marketing, particularly in sales, it went up, quite a bit in the $20 to $40 million range. So I think it's an interesting trend, which we will definitely be continuing to track, and some of that relates to also just the macroeconomic environment, as well as the availability of capital and venture money. So I thought I would throw this in quickly. Last year we sorted the data also by East Coast and West Coast companies. And being an East Coaster, it's interesting to see the difference in average company compensation levels. And yes, according to the data, the West Coast guys are getting paid a lot more. But we saw some other interesting things that sort of fits some of the stereotypes of East Coast companies being a bit more conservative than West Coast companies, although what will be really interesting is to compare that this year, because that could also just relate to a slight conservative lag from the recession when everybody cut back, and the West Coast companies may have started spending more quickly. So we'll certainly be comparing that in this year's benchmarking, which is open now. So I thought I would do a couple of slides quickly on, because everybody wants to look at Salesforce.com, I think it's interesting just to look at what they've done since their IPO, which was in 2004. And again, it's, as I said before, it's important to remember that they're a $2 billion company, and that they also were a very early SaaS company, so they built all their own infrastructure. They didn't have the kind of outsourced hosting systems or automation platforms like Adaptive Planning or NetSuite or any of the other ones, the billing platforms, all the other great platforms that are out there today that you can use. And they also had to break new ground through trial and error of figuring out, how do you manage a sales and marketing organization and the compensation for a SaaS company. So definitely today's SaaS companies require less investment because cloud technologies are more evolved. But it's interesting to note, though, that even at more than $2 billion, Salesforce is still spending more than just over 50% of revenue on sales and marketing. And if we look here, you can see they've been fairly consistent about that. They've managed to keep their R&D expenses relatively low across this span since their IPO in 2004 through 2012, and it's been averaging under 10% for this period. And their cost of goods and services is averaged at about 20%. So just in conclusion, what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about best practices, and I think we've talked about that a little bit. Hopefully you've gotten a sense of what some of the key SaaS metrics are and what the benchmarks are as companies are going public. But I think the important thing is that data and metrics are great, but unless they're used, they won't have as much impact as they could. And by using them means not just on an information basis, but I think really as a process. It needs to be shared within the company regularly, incorporated into the ongoing management process. And this is, I can only tell you, we've been working with hundreds of companies, some of the biggest names in the SaaS space and in the software space over the past 6-7 years. And, we see the ones that are the most successful, and if you measure that by revenue growth, by success in the IPO market, by success in terms of acquisition multiples, those are the ones who tend to be very, very metrics driven and who want that data, use it all the time, don't just look at it once a year when they're doing the budget, and it's well communicated. So I like to share this, that I definitely see business like sports is about constantly driving performance or benchmarking your performance against peers and leaders. And it was great fun to see the unbelievable performances last summer in the London Olympics. So it's fun to compare some of our performance in the tech industry with trying to compete at that level. So I'd like to make a quick pitch for this year's software and SaaS benchmarking, which is open through mid-April. It's the most comprehensive and longest-running benchmarking in the industry. Hundreds of software companies have participated. It's a paid benchmarking because we have a team of accountants and statisticians who clean, normalize, blind, and aggregate the data, and also because we invest in the confidentiality of our databases and the systems. So we cover companies with revenues between $1 million and $350 million. And so about half of them are private companies and about half are public companies. So the data that we collect is in much greater detail than is released through the public information. And I hope anyone on this call, on this webinar, will at least take a look at it and consider participating. And I can only urge you to do that now, because the one thing about benchmarking is that you have to run it for a certain amount of time and then you have to close it so that you can close the data. But we'd love to work with any new companies that haven't participated yet. So with that, I think we move to the Q&A portion of this, and we're happy to answer. I think Dave and I are very happy to have the chance to speak with you and answer any questions. So I'll turn it over to Rihanna.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Dave. That was great. We do have a few questions I want to get to, as we do have a few minutes. First, I'm going to go back to Dave. One of the first early questions that came in was in slide 10 of yours. You spoke about non-collaborative style of legacy systems. But the question is, aren't they moving towards cloud and collaboration? Aren't you seeing that?
Well, I think when we're talking about the Oracle Hyperion, SAP Business Objects, and IBM Cognos, those companies haven't traditionally been that good at developing their own apps or developing things. That's why in the 2006-2007 time frame, actually those three companies acquired those, Hyperion, Business Objects, and Cognos. There's about $16 billion worth of acquisition activity as Oracle, SAP, and IBM tried to position themselves to better address some of the apps that were prevalent at that time. And I think we have another revolution going on now. So I guess the question is being asked is whether those companies will now be able to suddenly develop viable cloud apps themselves. Gartner and various other consulting groups think that they will have difficulty playing catch-up because there's several things that are fundamentally different about cloud applications. It's not like you can take a big iron application and suddenly make a few changes to it, and all of a sudden it's a light, agile, flexible, low-cost cloud application. Adaptive planning, for instance, has been around for 10 years. We're going to celebrate our 10th anniversary in May, and it's something that has to sort of start from the ground up and then just be continuously improved to make it faster, more efficient, more efficient for hosting, for responsiveness, for all these things, and that all comes together. It's just, it'd be very, very surprising if these big iron companies could come out with a successful cloud product. That's why I think you see a lot of, positioning moving around, but not very many of these people producing their own products.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Lauren, I got a question for you here. Salesforce.com's R&D as a percentage of revenue seems pretty low. It seems that most SaaS firms are spending more like 15% of revenue on R&D. Is Salesforce underfunding R&D?
Well, I can't answer whether they're underfunding R&D because that's sort of a value judgment. That's what they're choosing to do, and by some other metrics, you'd say they're a very successful company, so I can't really say that. It is lower than the average. I'm just sort of trying to look in real time at some of my metrics here, but if I look at one group of companies of ERP and workforce management SaaS companies for 2012, the average spend in R&D was 21%, R&D expenses as a percentage of recognized revenue. But it does range from, for example, Cornerstone On Demand, who just went public in 2012 at 12%, 12.6%. Another really low one, SBS Commerce, is 10%, but you have NetSuite at 17.1%, Ultimate Software at 18%. Workday is showing R&D expense at 46%.
Wow. So it's really a range.
So it's definitely a range, and actually we're doing some work this week. We have a blog in sandhill.com, and we publish a blog this week on sales and marketing expense variations. And one of the things that we see, for example, I think this is really interesting. There's a pretty strong correlation between sales and marketing expense and revenue growth. If you look at, we took a bucket of 29, 30 SaaS companies, took their 2011 sales and marketing, compared it to their 2012 revenue growth, and found almost a 50% correlation. I mean, that's pretty strong for one data point. Whereas in R&D, I don't have it in front of me right now, it's much more all over the map. And that makes sense because, it depends on what your product is, how much you have to invest to keep it. It also depends on your strategy. You might be, maybe a company that has really high R&D expense this year is making a big investment in a new platform, in a new, add-on, new features, whatever. So there's definitely much more there. But it's just interesting also to see a company like Salesforce that A, it's quite low, and B, they've kept it consistent over almost 10 years.
Yeah. Okay, one last question. This is probably for you, Dave. Tell us more about the metrics that you share, or how you share the metrics and benchmarks with your executive team. How often do you do that? What level do you publish them? And what would you say would be your CEO's the most important metrics to him?
Yeah. See if I remember all those questions. First
Sorry.
of all, in terms of how often, again, as I mentioned in my presentation, best practices in metrics isn't something that you do it on, a monthly basis or biweekly. It's something that really has to be continuous. The planning and metrics, everything needs to be a part of your DNA. Customer satisfaction, it just needs to be something that you do every day. And there's so many things on the adaptive planning module suite, for example, that there's always something that you want to look at, consult, update, and otherwise, and it's adopted throughout the entire company. So, it's just something. We have some customers that have thousands of licenses, spread all throughout the world, and there's some that have fewer that are just starting out, and everything in between. Now, as far as our CEO and what we really look at, what we focus on, it really gets back to the presentation and the message about customer satisfaction. We just if you're going to be a cloud SaaS company and grow quickly, you need to be just side by side and aligned with your customers. And so there's almost, like no difference between how they think and how you think. And so we're constantly in contact and constantly, reviewing customer satisfaction. We have all sorts of methods where we gain input from them. We have channel partners who are also very highly motivated towards customer satisfaction. We have 400 plus channel partners for implementation and reselling and media and SaaS-based cloud channel partners, which have allowed us, again, to get into 80 countries around the world, and has really been a strategic advantage for our customers as well as for ourselves.
Great. Okay, well, we have approached the top of the hour, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I want to give a sincere thank you to Dave and Lauren. I think this has been a really informative hour and some really good data here. Again, a reminder to the audience that the recording and the presentations will be made available to you. We will send you an email with all the appropriate links. If you do have any additional questions on the benchmarking or anything directed specifically to our speakers, please let us know. Happy to connect you and answer any questions that you still may have. Again, thank you to Lauren and Dave and to all of our attendees. I hope everyone has a great rest of their week.
Thanks. Bye.